Welcome to the Core Concepts Lecture Series. At this series, we have a wide variety of guests come and tell us what they believe, why they believe it, and what they're doing about it. This show is sponsored by the Institute of Applied Metaphysics, the Church of Revelation, and we are guests of the Temple of the Sacred Gift in Memphis, Tennessee, well actually in Bartlett, Tennessee. And we hope to be here throughout this month and maybe a little bit further as we go along. Our guest today is Gary Witt, and I've known Gary for quite a long time, and he's an avowed skeptic, and we have had many people here telling us, and we're not really asking him to come tell us what he doesn't believe, we're asking him to come tell us what he does believe, why he believes it, and what he's doing about it, the same as everyone else. Gary is a native of Helena, Arkansas. He's a published author. He has a pictorial book. He has been an instructor, college-level instructor in philosophy. And so we're looking forward to hearing what Gary has to say. Welcome to the show, Gary.
Thank you.
Tell us about what brought you here.
Well, you invited me, and that was a good start. I haven't had an opportunity to talk in a long while, and it might be even better. I believe in spontaneity, and this may be the best opportunity to just kind of think a little bit off the top of my head. One of the things that I spent many years doing after teaching philosophy of art was to move into trying to practice it a little, so I became a media producer and a writer and producer of videos, and I think that's important because my view of the world is very, very much to appreciate lovingly the surface of things. You know, I think there's a great deal of faith to be gotten simply from looking around. And so my faith is not deep in any religious sense, but I have a deeply spiritual conviction about the world and about our place in it. I feel fortunate to have been able to blend oral history, and I've done a significant amount of oral history, interviewed 375 World War II veterans, plus probably 1,000 other people. I mention that also because it was an outgrowth of my visual career as a media producer, where I would raise funds and write grants to do shows I cared about in the cultural community. But the oral history in particular may be more related than you think. I remember the numbers of times that older people would say to me, "Boy, what an opportunity this was to get my thoughts together. Here I am telling my story, haven't done this lately, haven't thought about it much. This is a way of focusing and coalescing and crystallizing what I believe." An oral historian helps bring that out. Okay, well, that's what I did for years, plus wrote and produced shows which hopefully reflected a point of view. So my philosophy is that I am very, very much a visual observer and very, very much an appreciator, and care deeply about the way that world out there manifests itself in the visual arts. I care deeply about it in the written word and in poetry. I just think that the whole world is a great big palette for somebody who's interested in philosophy and who has a visual sense. Now, the bad side of that, bad in terms of certain people I might talk to, is that I don't have any particular belief in anything that would amount to a deep, deep faith or conviction. I think those are very dangerous things to hold. I think people in groups are dangerous sometimes, and I think that holding something without any question, I think unconditional faith is not only scary sometimes, I mean, look at human behavior in the history of the world, but it's also limiting in the sense that it leads us to believe what others want, and it discourages our own questioning and our own skepticism about taking a fresh, objective look at everything. I am a little suspicious of most anything that's faith-based because it was gotten from basically someone being very persuasive and someone being open to it, rather than a serious, objective inquiry into that core question, not you, not the person down the street, but who am I? Who am I? And what do I believe? And how did I get this way? And what does it matter what I believe? And an additional question, which used to freak my philosophy students out a little bit, that I would say, you weren't asked to be born. You were like Nietzsche. Nietzsche said, We never asked to be born, and many of us, if we were wise, would probably wish we had not been born. But by golly, we're here. Now what are we going to do about it? You know, what do we do? The question I used to tell my students is that not only are they given the great, great, great privilege of being alive, especially in a fairly abundant society, but they also are given a huge moral responsibility. It comes with a price. That price is, how do I conduct myself as a human? It comes as, how do I promote and demonstrate the incredible godly qualities that humans can possess? How do I exemplify the humanity that I was given? So I think there is a moral responsibility, and that raises about 800 questions, you know. There are lots of questions that I have. Of course, the reason students were freaked out is because they look at me and say, me? I don't have any moral responsibility. Well, I think they do. I think everyone does. I think that's part of what our quest in life is to ask ourselves, who are we and what is the meaning of our lives, but what do we owe? What do we owe, you know, the world around us? So one of my beefs, not that I have any real beefs, but if a skeptic were to be true to himself or herself, he would probably object to blind faith in anything without question or without any kind of asking the hard, difficult questions about why am I being asked to believe this, and why is it important to me, and what does it do for the greater good of humanity to believe what you're asking me to believe. In other words, skeptics do tend to be a little bit less willing to accept things just on blind faith because it may be what they want to believe, or because it may be what they were told to believe, or you name it. So the notion of moral responsibility, I think, partly includes the tough question about who am I and what is the meaning of life and what is the meaning of my life, and do I count or not? You can find it all in the arts. I mean, if you want a religion that doesn't have all the dogmas and creed and the suspicious history connected with organized religion, you can find every bit of it in the practice and creative output of artists, if you want. Even visual artists alone could be a religion. Well, hell, Elvis is a religion, you know. I mean, anything's a religion. But artists understood that they could crystallize and somehow conceive the essence and share that and demonstrate the essence of what it means to be human with others, and what Jim would understand very well as universal values. I don't mean something like I like peas or I don't like corn. Universal values that recur over and over throughout time, throughout history, throughout cultures, throughout the entire geography of our world. There are certain core concepts, certain core universal values. Most of the time they have become universal beliefs. So my question to you is, you're in this game Herman Hesse called the glass bead game, the gamble. We were not asked to be here, and we don't know what the hell we're doing here, really. That's the start of what I really believe is I'm an existentialist. I am an instinctive existentialist. Oddly enough, I was an existentialist when I was 7, and I didn't know it, as I questioned what is the meaning of life and what can I do to add purpose and meaning to my life and then to the world. You know, that's what all of us should ask. Paul Gauguin, back to art, Gauguin's greatest painting is in the Boston Museum, and it's a big triptych canvas, 20 feet long or 15, whatever, and it's the title of it is Who Am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going? That's the title of Gauguin's painting, about some native people in the island chain where he ran away from home and got a pet monkey and a few girlfriends and lived over in the islands, you know, in the Tahiti. So that was his question. Well, how did he get that question from living in the tropics among natives in 1880? It's a universal question that we've all probably asked. So my place here today is partly to just say I'm a devil's advocate, and I don't necessarily completely concur with everything I'm saying, you know, but I do think it needs to be said. I think that we have found ourselves in a highly alienated world that seems to be getting maybe a little more frightening. There are a lot of issues and questions that have no answers, and a lot of us rush to answers, I think, without any exploration of the real meaning or implications of what we're embracing. I had the good fortune to know a lot of people who would loosely be called alternative thinkers, New Agers. A lot of people can call them New Age people, meaning that they've somewhat rejected traditional forms of belief, but they've moved towards other forms of belief. And as a person who was trained in philosophy, I couldn't help but notice that much and most of what a lot of these dear souls believed deeply was without any basis whatsoever. None whatsoever, except the desire to believe it. And that doesn't mean that I'm a bad guy or anything. It's just, let's be honest with you. If you are going to hold a belief dearly and try to impose it on others, or try to act out those beliefs in the form of some action that might affect society, then you might want to have a pretty good basis for what you believe, or maybe you could be wrong. You know, you really could be wrong. A lot of people have maintained some pretty bad beliefs and gotten away with it for a long time. So a strong faith is just not enough. That faith can be in the eradication of Jews. You know, that faith can be in the eradication of Catholics, for God's sakes, or in the eradication of people who don't live in East Memphis. You never know. In other words, the essence here is utter unconditional tolerance. We're all kind of travelers on a planet. I don't believe we really know what's going on. I don't think we really have very many answers. But I think the journey and the questions we ask are maybe the most challenging things, that they're all inspiring to think about the gift we're given to take this journey and ask these questions in an objective and sensible way, and it will lead you into some wonderful areas, you know. I think a skeptic is someone who just asks questions about how you got to the point you are. Why do you believe this? They're not popular at parties, skeptics aren't, but they beat the hell out of atheists, you know. I mean, they did a survey recently and found that people who profess atheism are more abused and hated in America than child molesters.
Oh,
They are. I mean, it's the bottom of the barrel. And I have friends who say, oh, I'm an atheist. I say, keep that quiet. Don't talk about that. Say you're an agnostic. Say you're a skeptic. Say you're a doubter. But don't say you're an atheist. You won't get a job, you know. There's a lot of prejudice against it. But I don't, you know, what does it mean? It means that you don't believe in a supreme being who answers your every prayer, and who is on call somehow to wish you well and see you into a better world. I don't believe there's such a supreme entity like that. Therefore, I'm not sure, you know, in terms of labels, I have no clue what an atheist really is. But I do know what a skeptic is. A skeptic is somebody who is committed to asking certain questions before they take what Kierkegaard called the leap of faith. Now that brings me to the next interesting point about this confusion we're all in. We all have faith. We all need faith. I think that we are born with, you know, bodies and minds and a set of sensory organs and whatever, but we're born with souls, and we're born with a highly developed spiritual sense. It may be that our spiritual capacity is the most defining thing that keeps us apart from other animals. We're 99% the same genetically as chimpanzees, but we have a spiritual capacity. And what does that mean, and what do we do with it? And how would you say, theoretically, how would you abuse it? You know, how would you abuse a spiritual capacity? Well, you just be sloppy and believe any damn thing that the most charismatic person tells you. You know, I don't have any tolerance for cults, you know, because the way they arrived at that belief system is simply bogus. But they may believe what the cult member believes, but the way they got to it was not through any kind of rational, clear, objective thinking about our place in the world. They got to it because somebody persuaded them and told them. You know, that's not, for me, not enough. That's what a skeptic is. It's been shown that probably over 90% of people believe what their parents raised them to believe. I mean, so what? You know, that's great. I mean, it's great. We're not all trying to be philosophers out there. I mean, we're not all destined to think the world through and have great thoughts. I mean, it's just, I don't have very great thoughts. You know, I'm confused more now than I was when I was younger. But the point is, I don't hold anyone accountable for the fact that they may have faith-based beliefs that they've never questioned. But I do hold them accountable when they start, maintaining some action through those beliefs and trying to espouse those beliefs onto others and trying to promote those beliefs in a greater setting because they're really basically unearned, you know. One of the most chilling things I had, and this is just a religious sentiment, I'm not a person who believes in the literal interpretation of the Bible, and I was in a class of about 30, and I showed a film about the history of the world, actually, and it was a terrific film from the History Channel called A Brief History of the World in 2 hours, which is a hoot. I mean, they condensed the history of the world into 2 hours, and it's a dynamic, incredible thing that everybody ought to be required to see. But they start, of course, with the Big Bang, and someone raised their hand in the class and said, "Don't take me any further. I don't want to hear about the Big Bang, and I don't want to hear about evolution, and I don't want to hear about how the world was formed in billions of years. I know how the world was created. It's created in 6 days, and God rested on the seventh." And, you know, she began to talk about Genesis and the biblical creation. And I listened, and certainly she's in the majority, not me. So I listened, and then I said, "How many of you all agree with her?" And everyone in the class raised their hand. And then I said to myself something I should never have said openly, and I've told this story before. I should never have said this. I wasn't professional, but I said, then what the hell am I doing here? I mean, why am I teaching philosophy in a situation in which everyone in the class believes in a certain book, which is kind of a glorious mythological interpretation, one of thousands on earth, the Bible. One, you know, they believe it unquestioningly. They believe and base their lives on the literal facts given in the Bible. The world was created in 6 days. And they said, "Well, we can have our philosophy and you can have yours." And I said, "No, I mean, philosophy asks questions and probes and does the difficult and uncomfortable work of being authentic and being honest and being brutally honest, even when it hurts. The truth does matter. It has to. It's like the X-Files, you know, the truth is out there, right?" They also said, "Be scared, be very scared." I mean, it's a scary world. It really is. Let's begin with the fact that this is a really frightening place. You know, the despair, the alienation, the lack of meaning, the lack of purpose. No wonder Nietzsche said, "I'd rather not been born at all." But hey, we're here, and you can create this glorious, highly charged spiritual existence which has layer after layer of glory and meaning and joy, not only for yourself and others. And you can do all of this without a whole lot of strong beliefs and systems that were handed down to you from thousands of years ago, or that involve biblical narratives and things of that nature. People who may choose to believe the Bible, at least I wish they could study enough to ask themselves the hard questions about how one arrives at such a story. My preference, and I mean, I certainly would be foolish to get into an argument about religion, but my preference is to look at religion as different than philosophy. It's not a philosophy. It is religion answers your questions for you, and philosophy asks them. They're totally opposite. So if you choose to be religious, and we all kind of are just by nature, all cultures are religious. They have a spiritual impulse. So, you know, what does that all mean? If you choose to do that, you need to at least base it on what Socrates begged everybody to understand is the truth. I mean, there is such a thing as truth. And it's not unique to the individual who's espousing a doctrine either. Truth is out there, and reality is out there, and we don't create our world. We participate and enjoy and derive the benefits from a shared world, but there is such a thing as truth and fiction. There's such a thing as a fact, you know. And I kind of get a little concerned over the years. I've grown concerned over people who have total, complete, utter disregard for the facts. It doesn't matter. Facts don't matter because my truth is my truth. And that requires a little defending, you know, when you really stop and think about it. If you all have your own truths, then we better need to set some standards somewhere. Then we need to draw a line, because we got people murdering people in the streets for their truths. We got people who think they're Jesus who go down and gun down 20 people saying Jesus told them to, and that's their truth. It's not all together in the mind of the beholder, in the eye of the beholder. There is an objective reality out there. And our goal is to partake in that spiritual part of ourselves that is either God-given or not, but we got it. And to ask ourselves that hard question of how do I live up to my moral responsibility to seek the truth and to seek it bravely, and authentically wherever that leads. It hurts. It really hurts. I mean, I was raised in a fundamentalist Baptist church, and I used to be so sad that I didn't believe that stuff. I was 7 and 9 and 11, and it hurt me that I didn't believe it. But hey, look what happened. The world shifted more towards my feelings than theirs. Religion pretty much is losing its grounds, losing its footing. There's an entire discussion here, several discussions about the rise of science and whether or not science should just be honored as the only fact-based reality we actually have. Objective, dispassionate measurement and verification of known data. That may be all we've got. I have spiritual friends who can fly to work without a plane and see the dead and talk to their great-grandfathers, but they believe in gravity. They don't try to climb walls, and they don't behave as if the world's not like it is. We all know that objects exist in a certain mass, and they're all on this planet in a way that's called physics and mathematics and trigonometry. We drive cars and we don't press the gas because we know they're going to create more velocity and therefore more mass. They're going to harm people more if they hit them. And we understand the world around us, but we set it aside a lot of times. We set it aside when it comes to our belief system. It's like a philosopher told me once. He said, it's a salad bar age. You just walk along with your plate and you pick out whatever you damn well like, whatever suits you. You just choose what you want to eat that day. It doesn't really matter, what people believe. And there is some truth to that. That may be okay. There may be such a subjective element in the universe that we probably may have a right to do that. But I'm kind of arguing as a devil's advocate that we may want to maintain that there is an objective reality and that we are responsible morally to adhere to it to at least the degree that we should ask some of those hard questions about, who am I, what is my moral responsibility, and what does it mean, to be human. So say you did all of that, then I will tell you that the world, for me and for millions of us and you too, the world is a really, really exciting place. I mean, it's not a sacrifice to give up certain beliefs that I was raised with. I don't miss them. I mean, the surface of things alone is a joy. And so the only thing we've got is a journey. All we've got is the journey and the path. And I'm thrilled that I have fewer answers now than I did when I was 20. I thought I knew something at 20, and now I'm completely aware that I don't. And so there's nothing wrong with all of this. I'm a non-believer maybe in someone's eyes, but in fact I feel like I've been given the privilege to be authentic and embracing a much wider picture of what it means to be a believer. And it includes a lot more, and it's not objective, and it's not judgmental, and it doesn't exclude other points of view, and it's kind of open, and you take what you can. And I like being an objective observer. I think my inclination to video and media and productions was that I was never quite a joiner, and I'm perfectly happy to have reached my mid-60s and onward and always been a bit of an outsider and always been a bit of an observer and always seen the things in front of me as a sort of passing parade, and always enjoyed the fact that you might write a great novel about what was going on around you, and always seen people as characters in a great piece of art. And the world is just sacredly beautiful. But you don't have to get in there and kick and fight and hurt others, and you don't have to believe in something till you're blue in the face, until you scream at others about it, and you don't have to believe anything that deeply and desperately. I'm scared of group thought, Orwell. What did you say once, that quote you were talking about, men are dangerous in groups? What did?
When men run in packs, they lose their sense of decency.
When men run in packs, they lose their sense of decency. I don't think there's any apology needed for being a bit of an observer, an objective observer. I think by example, maybe one can pass along some of the values of being sacred without being religious, and can pass on the fact that you don't really, really need a lot of the religious trappings in order to live an exemplary moral life. we had about 3 hours of session in philosophy to where I argued to reduce all world religions, all of them, down to the golden rule and say, if we only just practice the golden rule to treat others like we want to be treated, you don't need Taoists and Buddhists and Muslims and Christians and all. Just be nice. You know, it's really that simple.
Or police force.
Or a police force. Well, of course not.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's not true. I think there's an inherent darkness in humans that require police, and I think that the criminal element in the human makeup is just as real as the divine element. That's unfortunate. We are really complex
But if
creatures.
everybody is following the golden rule, that's what
Well,
you
of
said.
course, that would be unbelievable. It couldn't happen, I don't think, because I think human nature is such that there are, in fact, let's call them the darker elements of the darker side of our human natures, and I think we all have it, you know, to one degree or another, and that raises about 800 other questions too. The whole question in ethics, which I don't understand it well enough to get into it, but everybody knows it. Are we really responsible for our behavior at all? I mean, do we blame criminals, or do we just punish them because we want revenge? I mean, are people really responsible for what they do? If they were, why can they take one little bitty white pill and that behavior changes? I mean, why is it they're so biochemically tied, and yet they're free? I don't know that we have the free will we would like. I think we are biochemically tied to a certain path in life, and I think of it more like a train. You're born on a train, and you're born towards a destination, and boy, you can get up and get from car to car, and you can go to the dining car, and you can go up and talk to the engineer in the front, you can hang out the window, but you can't get off that train. And there are destinies, and I think that humans are born with a certain genetic package. Better learn to live with it, and it's called compromise, it's called adaptation, it's called, you know, learning to live with one's life limitations. I never tried to be a great neurosurgeon because I knew I couldn't. So, I mean, be realistic, but it's also just called authenticity. That's where my talk would always come back to. If I were characterized as anything, skepticism is more an attitude. You know, I don't know that is there a school of skeptics? I know there was in Greece. I'm an existentialist, and I didn't even know what it meant, but it was obvious to me as a very young person that we didn't have a whole lot of guaranteed meanings in this world, and we better get out there and figure out what's available to believe in, and how we can authenticate that belief, and how we can live that belief in an authentic way. And I thought about things, and about 5 or 8 years later, I discovered that I'd been thinking roughly and badly. I'd been thinking about existentialism, and I didn't know it.
Could you give
And so I began to, you know,
a definition for the viewer of what you would call an existentialist?
Yeah, well, yeah. Here's what I did in class, and I still do that. I would say my philosophy of life, I would sum it up in 3 words. Let's Google it. I'd always say, let's Google it. Sometimes I'd say, why don't we Google it? Maybe 5 words. It's all out there. And that brings me back to how I held this book up. There is so much depth and meaning in one blade of grass that you can spend your life appreciating it. You know, Blake, wonderful, William Blake, the poet, said, see the world in a grain of sand. There's glory everywhere. And that's not to demean or degrade that glory, but to open oneself up to an authentic appreciation of it is what it means to be an existentialist. It's not always happy. It's not a happy notion, and it doesn't start with a very happy thought. You should Google it. I mean, you should every day you should get up and look up some concept and read a little about it, you know, and just kind of acquaint yourself with the other points of view and all. But existentialism is, in essence, and it's a book, it's 800 books, so I can't define it exactly, but it basically is an admission, a sad admission that life is without purpose. Well, what if it were with purpose? Whose purpose would that be? Would that be God's? Or would it be my parents? Or would it be destiny? Or what does purpose even mean? But life is without purpose. Therefore, life could be construed as without meaning. Life is without purpose and meaning. So our moral responsibility as members of the human species is to create meaning and create purpose. in a positive way. Hitler created a lot of purpose, you see. So you can't just go out willy-nilly. But if you have a sense of your context and who you are and what it means to be humans and some plain old common sense, all you need to be a morally good person is just to use a little common sense. Don't hurt people. Don't kick dogs. You know, don't steal. Don't harm another. Don't do anything you don't want done to yourself. It's really not that complicated. An existentialist starts with basically a blank slate. They say, I am a human, but I don't know what in the world that means. Well, you know, Descartes, who wasn't an existentialist at all, but Descartes is famous for saying, well, what do I have in my dark room with nothing around me? What do I have? Well, I think, therefore I am. You know, and that's become a platitude, a joke, but it actually is very true. All he knew was that he was a thinking being in some unique way. Not like a monkey or an octopus. He was a thinking, unique, sentient, they say, being. Okay, he developed a lifetime philosophy from the fact that I think, therefore I am. It made him more of an idealist, meaning that he thought a lot of things came out of our minds, where a rationalist may think that and an empiricist may think it's all out there. So all this philosophy gobbledygook, which is complicated. But basically, an authentic existentialist doesn't even say, I think, therefore I am. They basically say, I know I exist in some shape, form, or fashion, and I know, instinctively know, that it is my moral responsibility to live a life of meaning and authenticity, and to find the ways that that manifests itself. So the interesting thing about existentialism is that if it's a 10-chapter book, the first 2 or 3 chapters are really dismal. I mean, oh my God, there's no God, there's no meaning, there's no purpose, there's no reason to live, which that's chapter 1, 2, and 3. But then it gets really, really kind of glorious, you know. People need to keep reading. Nietzsche's supposed to be such a doomsday, God is dead sort of fellow. He's one of the most joyful, life-affirming human beings to ever write about philosophy, because people didn't read enough of him. I mean, you have to follow that period of cleansing and that period of awareness that comes from that soul-searching realization, I'm alone in this world. You know, I mean, you're not alone, you got loved ones and all, but basically you are born here and you leave by dying alone. And you witness a lot of glory and a lot of grace and a lot of spiritual love, but you also witness countless killings and wars and meanness and inexplicable behavior. Humans are really complicated. So an existentialist takes an objective view to not really judge any of that, but to ask oneself, how can I live a meaningful, authentic existence with purpose in the face of a purposeless surrounding? And that's just the first sentence of the explanation, and it obviously goes on, but you can trace the influence of that throughout modern culture, through the paintings, through the poetry, through the literature. And in fact, I think that to some degree, because there's a kind of an osmosis that happens in the world where we're members of the 20th century American society, we're all kind of existentialists. I mean, if you're not a doubter after Kennedy was killed and Martin Luther King was killed and 9/11 occurred and Vietnam and all the sad, tragic, break your heart things that have happened in our lifetimes, if you're not a little bit of a doubter or an existentialism, then you're living in some sort of paradise world that may not be quite attuned to the realities of things. I mean, I think you're being in denial a little. Now, when you get to that point of realization of how tough things are, you do seek answers, and I think that that's the basis for religion and the basis for all belief systems. I think it's really wonderful, and I think that the spiritual quest towards something meaningful is all we have. And even the worst atheist is a spiritual being, I think. He's probably, maybe they're more of an existentialist without knowing it and saying, well, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God. Actually, I'm not sure there's any reason to be alive, but I'm going to try my best to create reason in my little child, or in my volunteer work with sick people, or in my golfing, or I'm going to create meaning. Well, they're living existential lives without even knowing it, you know. And it's only the beginning. There's another branch that some of the existentialists picked up on that I won't even touch on, except to mention that phenomenology is a way of visually existing in a world that is existential. And if you run across the word phenomenology, you can Google it and read about how it ties in with the core beliefs of existentialism. But again, I'm no authority by any means on existentialism, but I do know that among the current philosophies, if you look at a history of 20th century philosophy, and that means to look at a history of 20th century culture, because everything has a philosophical driver. Everything is based on philosophy one way or another. You can't help it. You know, it doesn't mean you have to study it, doesn't mean you have to even know about it, but there's a philosophy under everything. And music, culture, and art, it all goes back to the questions that philosophy asks, and they're core questions that the Greeks pretty much answered. But we still are struggling, but they pretty much had it all. If we just went back and really read the Greeks, we'd be done with it, really. Alfred North Whitehead, one of the great mathematicians in the world ever, said, hey, philosophy is Plato, everything else is a footnote. Isn't that cool? You know, so Socrates, I mean, Plato and Socrates. And our, you know, current culture is reflective of all of that, whether we really realize it or not. I mean, the rise after the war, World War II, I mean, they're pretty, I noticed when I was young that no one talked about it, and they were all kind of shell-shocked in a way that they went on with building their homes and marrying their lovers, their wives, and having babies. I remember the early 50s, and the war was only 4 and 5 and 6 years ago. And it was nobody talked about it. Nobody talked about the millions and millions and millions of people that were slaughtered. Nobody talked about the sacrifices they made. It was just a done deal. My point is that we have great capacities, not only for denial, which is not healthy always, but we have great capacities for renewal and for adaptation and compromise, but mostly spiritual renewal. And my point is that if you look at a history of America and Western society since the 50s, it was an acceptance of the rising alienation of human beings. They talk about the man in the gray flannel suit for some reason. It's a Gregory Peck movie about a guy who was so anonymous that he wore a gray flannel suit. They talk about the outsider. They talk about the anonymity of being modern. And then the hippies, I mean the beatniks came along and tried to put a little bit of a stop on that and said, oh no, we're authentic. Look at our crazy lifestyle. Look at our poetry. Look at our profound insights. Jack Kerouac, all of that stuff. They spawned the hippies. And there's always counter movements and counter cultures, but the point really is that we have lived in an isolating, alienating, disaffected, disabused sort of culture for really the last 70 or 80 years. I mean, it's pretty much a known fact, and they call it, you know, the gloomy era and whatever they call it. It's postmodernism in certain theories and articles of, you know, poetry and literature and art. It's postmodernism, meaning that we did all we could with modernism, and then we just throw up our hands in the hell with it, you know, that sort of thing. We're kind of out of ideas here. Philosophy ran into a brick wall, and philosophers began to say, well, there's really nothing to talk about. I mean, words don't really have any meaning, and nobody really knows what each other's saying, and you can argue for 25 minutes on what the word God even means, much less touch him. You know, it's all just kind of lost, and so we got to be authentic, and we'll kind of circle our wagons and maybe turn closer to community. Where are we right now after 9/11? What's everybody telling me? Returning to community, returning to growing your own gardens, returning to self-sufficiency, returning to not dependence on others, not oil, not food, not anything. It's a return to one's authentic self is what we're, you know, all futurist thinkers always put in a little counterpoint and a counterbalance. They say, you know, that the world is headed towards this, but there's always, it's like one guy said, well, there's a big high-tech world coming, but we're going to have high touch to offset it. So it's always the yin and yang of being alive. So our society is on an accelerated course towards anonymity, towards maybe oblivion and madness. I mean, we're ruining our planet and stuff. But there's always that counterculture, subculture that says, oh, well, wait a minute, I'm going to grow my own garden and get a solar panel for my roof, you know, to heat my house, and I'm going to fight this, and I'm going to become authentically human in a way that matters to the current, you know. So we've got that wonderful balance, that wonderful movement where philosophy is still alive, you know, in the eyes of people who want to carry on something meaningful and authentic about this world, although we've lost grasp of a lot of what it means to be human. I think we're governed by corporations. I think consumers have become sheep. I think we let people kick us around, boss us around. I think that we don't really allow ourselves any freedom of thought like we used to. We're more willing to jump in and believe what we're told. It's a little bit, do you find that at all? I mean, I don't find this a great, free, independent era of spiritual questioning. I think it's all kind of a little bit, people are a little frightened of it, almost.
Well, in my books and in my studies, you know, the four pillars are identification, verification, observation, and meditation.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you could go over those.
Which is right up similar to what you're saying, and
Yeah.
because of the identifying of each of the principles. There's certain principles I think that stand out and slap you in the face. You really have to be obstinate not to know that they're there.
Mm-hmm.
Just like gravity.
Mm-hmm.
They're spiritual principles that way. Who do you feel like was your who do you look to as an existentialist that you like to read, or that was your favorite that you talked about with your students?
Let me take a little bit broader view and say, and I can't account, this is another one of my fascinating questions in life that I'll never have an answer to, is that, you know, how do we get the way we are? I mean, this whole idea of nature versus nurture, the whole idea of how much control do parents or society or ourselves certainly have over our behavior, over how we turn out. It's fascinating to me, you know. And I remember when a serial killer was on trial and a psychiatrist said, "Oh, come on, this guy's no more responsible for those murders than you are for catching a cold." I thought, whoa, wait a minute, we've stepped over the line. We are now in a biochemical driven world in which people are not even responsible for murdering young women. You know, they're driven by other forces that are God-given, that are destiny, and they can't control them. They're chemicals, stuff like that. Well, that's very scary, the whole argument of nature-nurture. Are we born this way, or does existentialism give us a chance to authentically create ourselves? See, I don't really know, but I'm answering the question that way because my own life, there's absolutely no reason for me to have turned out the way I turned out, which is a little odd and eccentric. In my environment where I was raised, I had a little bit of a birth trauma, and I think that was it. I think it was oxygen deprivation. I really do. I mean, I was so different that in terms of my influences, this stuff that's not obvious to others even now, I'm considered an oddball a bit. But this stuff was obvious to me when I was 6 years old, and I had to go to my father, who was a deacon in the Southern Baptist Church, and apologize to him for not joining the Baptist Church when I was 11, I think, which is called the Age of Accountability, because that's when Jesus joined the temple or something. I said, "Dad, I'm sorry, but I just don't believe any of this. I mean, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work for me. It makes no sense whatsoever, you know." And I found another path. And so what I did is I used to secretly read philosophy in high school. But my brother was a successful businessman, 4 years older, and he was a young budding entrepreneur who had made considerable wealth. He was killed in a plane crash, which is a momentous event. I was in business school, so I could be in his fraternity and go to and work with him and be in his businesses and be rich like my brother. I don't remember even asking whether I wanted that or not. But and I was secretly reading philosophy, and a teacher came over to me in the 10th grade and leaned over, and she said, "You're hiding your real interest, and I noticed you put it inside another book in study hall. Let me give you a couple of books to read." And one was called Philosophies for a Time of Crisis, and it was published in the late 50s, early 60s, and it was existentially related philosophy, not just about philosophers. Those are boring guys. Authors, poets, thinkers, you know, entertainers, musicians, people who live, you know. So that book just turned me really, really way onto philosophy. So then I discovered Bertrand Russell, who's certainly not an existentialist. He wrote Principia Mathematica. He wrote the great 20th century text on mathematics, but he was a deep thinker, and he wrote a book called Why I'm Not a Christian, you know, and I better be careful here. But the book basically said you don't have to have Christianity or any religion to live a meaningful, authentic life. Here's the way to do it. Here's why I don't fear death. Here's why I treat my children nicely. Here's why I'm a good person. And he outlined how you live as a non-Christian. I don't mean anti-Christian, but a non-Christian. Why I am not a Christian. That became my, not to use a pun, but that became my Bible for a year or two. And I began to read other Bertrand Russell. So when I got to school, I'm sitting in marketing class in 1965, and the guy's talking about selling, and he was saying the same thing that 9 other professors had said in the previous classes, and I said, the hell with this, I'm gonna go get in the philosophy department. So I walked across the campus and asked where the philosophy department was, and it was in the building next to the field house, a temporary tin building, a dome kind of thing, and I walked in, and Gene James, who's still there, was sitting on a desk with Carol Bowman, who passed away, and said, can I help you? And I said, yeah, I want to switch to philosophy. I'm 9 hours from graduating in marketing, and I want to switch my major to philosophy. And they said, son, you really don't want to do that. And they just kind of sent me away, and I laughed about it and took a couple of courses, and I ended up teaching philosophy. And it was I was destined to do that. Now I mentioned nature nurture because it is an interesting question which biochemical and neurosciences will answer. Someday in our lifetimes, we're going to know a lot more about how much control we actually have over who we are. A lot of good brain chemistry work going on to figure out what's causing us to be who we are, and that means we can maybe change it for the better. But the point is, I have no clue why I was such an eccentric guy who thought thoughts in a town where I was discouraged from doing that, and they carried the torch in my hometown for football and army and killing and violence and hunting and toughness and bodybuilding and stuff like that, you know, and it just kind of escaped me, and I never have understood or even cared much how I got the way I was back then, but it's been a consistent thing, you know, and I realized looking back on it that I was that way all my life. So what happened was that one thing led to another, and I read philosophy through my 20s and 30s and was really pretty passionate about it. Then it began to look a little irrelevant. I mean, you can't just read your whole life. And so I began to write and produce films, and found that my basic background in philosophy was about as instrumental to that as anything I could do, because I was writing documentaries and I felt like I had some insights into the bigger picture. Philosophy gives you a big picture contextual sort of thing to deal with, where you're not just dealing with an isolated thing, you're dealing with the big picture and where everything fits. Mostly it's the connections between A, B, and C, and D, and G, you know, it's how everything fits. So that was fun in writing all of those media shows, and so as it turns out, I began to teach philosophy again and realized that it really kind of never escapes you. And all it is all philosophy is educated, sophisticated guesswork. I mean, it's just like knowing a little more about the background and the issues and understanding the questions and then taking your best shot. Right. I mean, there's no answers. There's never been an answer.
But it is questions. It is educated questions.
Beautiful questions. That's all you need. I mean, do we have an answer to anything? I mean, really, do we? I don't know that we have an answer to anything. Nobody understands why we're here, why we die.
And yet we have to keep questioning.
You keep questioning, and that's been called so many times the journey, the path, and that's really all we have, I believe, and that's really all we need. I mean, I think that's all we need. Is the fun of it, is just to explore that path with a lot of joy, and to learn from better people than myself, and to constantly be aware of other ideas and what other people have reflected on and found meaning in. And that's why I held this book up. What I wanted to say is that you can study for 500 years all the philosophies and all the poetry and literature and art in the world, and you'll still have more to do. But on the other hand, I had a veteran friend tell me that he found himself aboard a submarine with Plato's Republic, and after he read it once, he read it 3 times, then he read it 9 times, and then 11, he was on a submarine, for God's sakes, and they didn't have any books. And he said he thought that did more to shape his life and to give meaning to his life than anything he could have done was to have one book and read it over and over and over. So there's even a lesson there, is that Blake was right all along. You can see the world in a grain of sand. I mean, the world around us is infinitely spiritual. But you don't need a lot of props. You don't need a lot else to get there. You just learn to think a little bit more clearly and set your ego aside a little bit. And our connection to the universe around us is immediate and vibrant and beautiful every day. And I'm saying that Plato reread 12 times is a lifetime of meaning. I'm also saying that Google is a damn miracle, and everything you've ever wanted to know in your lifetime is right there. All you have to do is type in about 6 words, and it is a miracle. And it is our problem nowadays is not getting knowledge. Our problem is managing all of this knowledge. And when I walked into classes, and I think that's why I got in trouble a lot with teaching philosophy, because the first thing I said in there was, it is no longer relevant to teach philosophy. Whoa, no longer relevant. I'm not going to tell you what Immanuel Kant and Descartes and Hume, we used to say David Hume. Doesn't matter what they said. It was contextually, culturally relevant, but not really. They had certain basic opinions about basic principles. What I am here as a philosophy teacher nowadays in 2013 is I'm the facilitator. I know how to put A and B together. I know where the secrets are. I know the connections, and I know how to find them. And I know how to paint a bigger picture for you to fill in. You like rap music? Let's start with philosophy. Google it. Learn about it. Learn why, where, how, what. You like anything, Google it, learn it, get more information, find the overarching philosophical principle that drives it. They say every shot of a bullet is a mathematical formula. Well, every thought in existence ever is a philosophical thought.
This is a good place. Yes, this is a good place to stop. Would you entertain people emailing you, asking you questions?
I was going to say that there's so much that would be fun to talk about, and one is the burgeoning rise of non-traditional, more free-thinking ways of viewing the world, and some of those do take religious forms. But if you get on Facebook now, there are probably dozens of sites that are specifically intended either to lead you away a little bit from traditional Christianity, or even there are more atheist sites on Facebook than there are Christian. Now, believe that. But there are more atheist representative sites. Not that I'm an atheist. I wouldn't be caught dead even talking to an atheist. I'm a person who believes deeply in the spiritual world, but I'm certainly not a believing Christian either. So all of these materials, I'd be happy to provide an email list, because a little exploration.
We'll give you your email address.
The American Humanist Society, the Richard Dawkins Foundation, Sam Harris Foundation, all these places are promoting free-thinking, non-traditional ways of approaching the world in the 21st century that are less faith-based and more scientifically based, but spiritually driven. Okay, my email is gwitt, Gwitt, 001 @gmail.com. And what I would do is to put together a little list of a bibliographical reading list and maybe a few comments. But again, it's only the beginning. I haven't even touched the surface of what's out there, and it's kind of a lifetime of great joy and fun in all this exploration. So these emails would be core, but every email leads you to 5 more. So you've got a lifetime of exploration.
I want to thank you for being with us today on the show, and for giving your email address and letting people ask you some questions if they have to. And I want to remind you that if you are viewing this show from any place except the Renford Broadcast Network, to please go to youtube.com and look at, type in the Renford Broadcast Network, and there you can see the information on the Laws of Material Wealth, the Bookman Show, all of this core concepts lecture series. And there's even a movie center where you can see movies that you might be looking for, but don't know where to go and get them. You can click on there and go to it. And thanks again to our host for this show, the Temple of the Sacred Gift. And thank our audience for being with us. And join us again next week on Core Concepts.